Welcome to my booktube channel and welcome to my new segment which is called I've Read Something. I've read a book. We'll be talking about books that I've read recently and I will give you reviews under 10 minutes hopefully. The book I want to talk about today is a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list in 2020 and Napolitano's novel Dear Edward. And I'm going to tell you what this book is all about. Today, almost exactly 10 years ago, on May 12th in 2010, an airliner, an Airbus, is on its way, I think it's an Airbus 330, on its way from Johannesburg in South Africa to Tripoli, the capital of Libya. And this airplane has about 100 passengers on board, and before landing in Tripoli, the plane crashes. Everybody dies on board except for one little Dutch boy who was 8 years old at the time, and his name is Reuben. And Reuben is the only survivor, and it's a miracle that he has survived. Social media is already there 10 years ago. Facebook is there, Twitter is there, and this story goes viral. It's one of the first real social media stories that goes viral all around the world. And one of the people who sees the story is American novelist Anne Napolitano, who at the time had published her first novel that is called Within Arm's Reach, about an Irish Catholic family and its story, its family saga in the United States. Anne Napolitano sees that story about that little boy, Reuben, and she asks herself, what has happened to Reuben? What is happening to Reuben after the crash in which his parents and his older brother has died, among many others. So this story goes around and around in her head for many, many years. And 10 years after the crash, almost 10 years after the crash, Anne Napolitano has published her novel, Dear Edward. Here we have an American family who is traveling from Newark to Los Angeles airport, and the crash happens in Colorado after about 5 or 6 hours flight time from New York. The question is, what happens to Edward, the little boy, Edward, after the crash, after his parents and his brother have died in that horrible crash? And that's the elaboration of the thought, what happened to Reuben 10 years ago in Holland. This story actually was never really answered because Napolitano said that the family who adopted Reuben have really guarded him for all the media interests, and nobody really knows what has happened to Reuben. I tried to find out this morning when I googled a little bit about the book and the history, but I didn't find anything about Reuben except Anne Napolitano's interviews, who tells about the process of writing Dear Edward. So Dear Edward is a book that is telling the story of the crash. We start in the first scene, in the first chapter. We see the family checking in at the airport in Newark. We see a lot of other characters who play a role later checking in on that flight. The second chapter already is dealing with a crash. The plane has crashed. The third chapter is the day in the hospital, the last day in the hospital before Edward goes home, because he is being adopted by his aunt Lacey and his uncle John. Lacey is the sister of his mother, Jane. So we learn a lot about Edward's life after the crash, and he has huge problems adapting, as anybody can imagine. The physical damage, the physical injuries get healed quite quickly, but the mental problems, the wounds, the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress syndrome that he suffers of is of course much harder to bear for him. And he's an outsider. He lives with his new parents, who have a very difficult marriage. The only good thing in Edward's life probably is, in the beginning, his neighbor, the neighbor's daughter, Shay, who's the same age as Edward, and they become friends and throughout the whole story, actually. We come back to the story in the plane. The plane has started, the plane has crashed, but Anne Napolitano tells slowly the story of the airplane and of those characters that we already met in Newark on the airport. Characters are being more developed in the story when we learn how the plane made its way to across the United States and then into Colorado and into that bad weather, and what really happened, why the plane crashed in Colorado. We get to learn that. So the big question that the book asks is it possible to come back from a catastrophe like that when you lost everything, when you have guilt feelings towards all the others who died on the plane? And Dear Edward is, of course, the beginning of a letter. And at one point, Shay, the neighbor's daughter, and Edward discover hundreds of letters in the house of his new parents. And they read those letters every night. These are letters written but by relatives of the people who lost their loved ones in the plane, and they're asking Edward all kinds of things like, have you seen my wife? Have you seen my daughter? You were the last person who have maybe spoken to him, to her, things like that. Or live your life. My son always wanted to do this. Please do that and give his life some kind of meaning. This is all a burden that lies on Edward's shoulders. But Edward gets more and more grown up throughout the novel, which we have a span of like 6 years almost from the crash to the end of the novel. So you can say pretty much that he's an adult when the novel is over. This is also a coming-of-age story in a way. This could be YA as well, this novel, Dear Edward, when you have the definition that YA is YA when the protagonists are young adults. And we have that case here with Edward, of course, and even with Shay. Many people love the book. Everybody loves the book. Washington Post and even the critics, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they praise Dear Edward. I had problems getting into that novel because I really didn't get the point of Edward's otherness. I think there is something that I miss that Anne Napolitano is not describing, at least not for me, to bring the boy's fate and his very, very special, haunted situation into my empathy. Too cold-hearted to feel that. But there's something like, and I read other reviews on Goodreads where people have the same kind of feelings. And what I don't like about the book, and that's maybe the last thing, two things I want to mention actually. One thing I don't like about the book, I think it's the characters on that airplane are stereotypical. They're not really deep characters, if you know what I mean. The Afro-American soldier, the Filipino woman named Florida, who is as big as Florida. That should be a joke. It is not a joke for me. The young woman who's pregnant, who hopes that her boyfriend Gary will propose to her when she arrives in Los Angeles. The millionaire who is a very arrogant, unsympathetic guy who has sex with the flight attendant on the toilet, something that Edward and his brother Jordan realize when they see the two getting into that small toilet. Those characters are not really deep characters, and I didn't get connected with any one of them. But, and another thing is, the ending of the novel is a little bit too cheesy for my taste. It's a very cheesy ending, which I'm not going to tell you because otherwise you might not read the book. Apart from that, Dear Edward is a very entertaining novel. It's a good novel. It's well built in a way, but it has its weaknesses, and that's why I don't really get why so many people give like 5 stars. I don't give stars to the books in I've Read Something, but I say that this is a good novel, but it's not exceptional. The plan is to deliver I've Read Something at least once a week. This is also my goal for 2020, to read 1 book per week. So in 1 week from now, you get the next video in my new segment, I've Read Something. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and bye-bye.